Hello and a warm welcome. Whether you're joining us in the UK or anywhere else around the world, I'm Sean Lay. It's lovely to have your company. We begin this hour with the death of the award-winning actor Sir Sidney Poitier, whose groundbreaking films in the 1950s and 1960s shone a light on both racism and wider social prejudice. He was 94. He was the first black man to win an Oscar for Best Actor, and his success paved the way for generations of black artists who followed. Films including To Sir With Love, In the Heat of the Night and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, all three of those in just a single year, reflected America struggling with issues of racism and prejudice, and indeed similar events in this country too. And at the height of the civil rights movement, he became an icon for many. His impact ultimately transcended the silver screen. Our correspondent Lisa Mazimba looks back at a long life of a Hollywood icon.
In the heat of the night.
Sidney Poitier's Virgil Tibbs, a man of authority.
I'm a police officer.
Intelligence and a steely determination never to back down. The kind of qualities that defined Poitier on screen and off.
Dr. Smith.
He made his cinema debut playing a doctor, a man of status, something almost unheard of for black performers then. And with roles like an escaped convict in The Defiant Ones and a struggling husband in A Raisin in the Sun, he tackled prejudice head on.
Maybe I'll get down on my black knees. All right, Mr. Charlie. All right, Mr. Great White Father. You just give us that money, and we won't come out there and dirty up your white folks' neighborhood.
The era, of course, meant he had a burden his white counterparts rarely had to carry, the weight of being a symbol, but he bore it with dignity. In Lilies of the Field, playing a travelling handyman, helping build a group of nuns a new chapel.
Sing it over.
The winner is Sidney Poitier.
He won the Academy Award, the first black performer ever to receive the Oscar for a leading role. In the years that followed, he became Hollywood's biggest star, redefining how audiences saw black characters, with films like To Sir With Love.
You will call me sir or Mr. Thackeray. The young ladies will be addressed as Miss, the boys by their surnames.
Some of what I am was reflected in those movies. And on top of that, I brought to it some of my values. So it was, in a way, I was saying to an audience, this is who I am. Look at me.
More controversial was his role as a highly gifted, hugely successful doctor engaged to a white woman in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
I love your daughter. There is nothing I wouldn't do to try to keep her as happy as she was the day I met her.
Some criticised it, saying the impression it gave was of an interracial relationship that was only acceptable because his character was so perfect and accomplished. It was still a huge box office hit.
Hello.
He also directed 80s comedy Stir Crazy, the first movie from an African-American filmmaker to pass the blockbuster $100 million mark in the United States.
What are you doing?
I'm getting bad.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sidney Poitier.
And when he was well into his 80s, an honorary Oscar. Hollywood recognition for a star who blazed a trail for so many.
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
And who entertained millions more. Sidney Poitier, one of the greats.
Sidney Poitier, whose death has been announced at the age of 94. Well, earlier, the playwright and author Bonnie Greer told Jane Hill that Sidney Poitier's impact on society in the 50s and 60s was enormous, and the actor and activist was a true one-off.
It's very difficult, maybe even impossible, to talk about the world, to talk about Sidney Poitier now, in the sense that we don't know anymore of the world that didn't have Sidney Poitier. He was my generation's sort of icon. There was no one really before him who had the kind of stature. I mean, I was a really little kid when he started working in the movies, but what was amazing about him was that he was of a generation. He's the last of a great powerhouse generation. Kirk Douglas died, I think, last year, but he was in that generation: Charlton Heston, Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, and Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis. And this kind of generation that came out of the theater in the 1950s and the late 1940s, we forget that to have this incredible Black man in their midst was really groundbreaking, because he was able then to kind of move along the same kind of trajectory that they were allowed to move upon that. Paul Robeson, a generation before, wasn't allowed that trajectory, but Sir Sidney was able to be in that trajectory that they were in, that Burt Lancaster was in, that Tony Curtis was in. So when he did win his Oscar, it kind of made sense to us in a way, because he was part of that sort of arc.
Bonnie Greer there. Let's talk to Pete Hammond, a columnist with Deadline Hollywood. Pete, thank you very much for being with us. This news must have had a huge reaction in the United States and in the film industry in particular. What sort of response has there been to the news today?
It's very moving, I have to say. We've had a lot of deaths, and we report on this, and you kind of get jaded. It happens so often, but every now and then something comes along that just hits you in the heart, and you read these tweets coming out from Oprah Winfrey. Whoopi Goldberg's made me cry, referencing To Sir with Love. There is something deep about the loss of Sidney Poitier, even though he hasn't made a movie in literally 20 years. He retired in 2001. He is with us. Obviously, this is the immortality of film and everything he represented, but he represented so much in Hollywood. He was such a legend, and that word is used so much, but in his case, it is so true that this has really hit Hollywood hard.
What's extraordinary looking back is that those three films we've already name-checked, In the Heat of the Night, To Sir with Love and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, all were released in the space of about a year, and they're all really impressive performances, very different characters. I mean, the very gentle school teacher in To Sir with Love, the kind of the anger, the kind of controlled anger of In Heat of the Night. I mean, there was never any doubt about his range as an actor, was there?
It was incredible range. And I've always thought of that year, 1967, where Poitier, actually two of those films you mentioned, In the Heat of the Night, which won Best Picture, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was nominated in that category, and won for Katharine Hepburn. He played opposite the winner of Best Actor that year, Rod Steiger, and the winner of Best Actress, Katharine Hepburn. Yet he himself, I think, canceled himself out because he was so great in three distinctly different movies, all three huge box office hits. The amazing at that time, when you consider all the civil rights and everything going on, that a Black actor was the #1 box office draw that year in America. Pretty remarkable.
It is, and what a career. Pete Hammond, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Lovely to talk to you. Thanks very much. Pete Hammond there on Sir Sidney Poitier, and we'll have more on BBC News in an hour's time to discuss this actor's remarkable career.